have a very strong mind and I spend a lot of time in my head. And sometimes that includes intellectualizing my emotions instead of actually feeling them. And sure as eggs, they come back later to bite me on the butt. I'm going to share with you what it means to intellectualize your emotions, why we do it, the problems it can cause, the signs you're doing it, and how you can stop intellectualizing your emotions so you can start to heal and live a more balanced, happier life. I'm Nicola, and I've spent decades learning how to reconnect with myself so I can release the past and start to heal my anxiety, my depression, and my emotional triggers. When we intellectualize our emotions, it means we think about what's happening to us. We use our mind and our intellect to think about our experiences instead of actually feeling what's going on for us. We use logic and reasoning, abstract concepts, lots of fancy words and complex ideas, but we're stuck in our minds thinking about what's going on for us. And we're using this as a defense mechanism. We are using our mind to suppress our emotions so we don't have to feel them. It's basically the difference between knowledge and experience. You might say, I am angry, or you might actually feel angry. One is knowing that you're angry, and the other one is actually being angry. And unfortunately, the most common therapy in our culture at the moment, one of the most popular ones is CBT or cognitive behavior therapy, and it encourages this intellectualization. Now, it can be helpful in situations where we have unhelpful thought patterns and we can notice those and interrupt those, but unfortunately, it doesn't really get to the root cause of why we're intellectualizing our emotions and why we have these feelings coming up. And that's one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of more body-based healing techniques. And over the years, I've collected all of my favorite techniques that allow me to stay mostly out of my head and more in my body because they're what works for me. And I've got a download with those favorite techniques that you might want to check out to help you find ways to heal that doesn't require being so stuck in your head. Intellectualizing our emotions can actually be helpful sometimes because it allows us to function. Think, for example, of a nurse working in a hospital and she's had to give a patient bad news about a diagnosis. By intellectualizing, she can push those emotions aside and continue on with her job. She can help the other patients who need her care and then come back to those emotions later when she's got time and space to process them. But intellectualizing allows us to avoid feeling those painful emotions. And I can understand why we might want to distance ourselves from those painful emotions, because I've had times where I've felt emotions that were so deeply painful that it felt like physical pain. It really can feel like intense physical pain. And so we use intellectualization to push those aside so we don't have to feel those. We also do it to distract ourselves from situations that don't match up with our self-image, things that challenge our idea of who we are. If we see ourselves as a sensible person, then if we're having strong emotions, that might be really challenging for us, and we say, okay, I'm going to push those emotions aside so I can go back to being a sensible person. It's also something that can happen as a result of complex PTSD, which is a result of childhood abuse or neglect. So when we have CPTSD, we may find that it's in those experiences it was safer to be intellectual, it was safer to think about things, but it wasn't safe to feel. I know in my childhood, I learned that emotions weren't safe. They could be turned into things that I didn't really enjoy. And so it was better for me to stay in my head and think about what was going on for me, because there was no safe way for me to express the emotions that I was feeling about what was going on for me. And similarly, feelings can be very threatening for us, either other people's feelings or our own feelings. If we're not used to feeling feelings, when feelings come up, we don't know what to do with them. And so we tend to want to push them away. And if in the most extreme circumstances, those feelings can actually trigger emotional flashbacks to those painful emotions of childhood. And I've got a whole video that goes through emotional flashbacks and how they affect us and how we can manage them. We can also use intellectualization of our emotions to pretend that everything is fine, to put on a veneer. Even if there's a mess going on inside, we put on this veneer of everything being fine, and we're hiding away the fact that maybe we're not as functioning as well as we'd like the world to think we are. Unfortunately, when we intellectualize our emotions, it can cause a variety of problems. So we need to understand when it's a helpful strategy to put aside our emotions and when it is actually turning into a type of avoidance, when we're using it to avoid actually feeling our feelings. Because if we avoid our emotions for long enough, it turns into repression. And when we repress our emotions, they're still there buried under the surface and they can leak out, seep out into our lives in other ways. It can cause mental health issues. So we may end up with anxiety or depression or panic attacks. And it also affects our relationships because when we can't feel feelings, it's very hard for us to have empathy. We really can't understand what other people are experiencing and have empathy for them. And when we don't have empathy, we don't appear trustworthy in those relationships. People don't trust that we're being genuine. And it also can feel invalidating because they are having these feelings, but we're unable to handle that. Or maybe we're having feelings and we can't handle that, but our inability to handle and manage feelings means that they don't feel connected to us in that relationship. The biggest issue, however, is that ultimately everything that you are pushing away, everything that you are intellectualizing is still waiting there under the surface until we're ready to process it. Emotions don't just go away. You can't just switch them off. Emotions are part of the human experience. And if we want to heal, we have to actually feel those feelings and work our way through them. We cannot get through these experiences that we have in this human experience without actually accepting it. If we push it away, it doesn't move through us. We are stuck in that experience. So it's so important that we're actually experiencing those things. The things we push away, the things we deny, just stick around until we deal with them. So how do we know when we are intellectualizing our feelings? Well, one of the common things that we do is that we focus heavily on the details of a situation. And this can be helpful. Let's say, for example, a loved one has just died and we need to organize the funeral. Being able to put those feelings aside through intellectualization so that we can focus on the details and all the logistics of organizing that can actually be helpful. But at some point, those emotions will come back when we have a quiet moment where there's nothing to do and no one around. Those feelings will come back out. It can also mean doing a lot, researching a lot, really digging into the nuts and bolts of a situation, becoming an expert on a thing instead of actually experiencing the thing. So in my case, I've recently learned about complex PTSD, and having recognized the patterns of that in my own experience, I'm doing a lot of reading and learning and understanding, and it makes sense to me. So I'm spending a lot of time feeling comfortable that I understand what's going on, but that's not the same as experiencing it. And it can also be having knowledge about an upsetting topic and being able to talk about it dispassionately. So being able to describe, oh yes, I know that's why my mother behaved the way she did. I understand that she was dealing with her own issues and her own trauma. And talking about these potentially upsetting situations in a very calm and almost detached manner can be a sign that we're intellectualizing because we're in our head about it rather than actually having the experience of what it was to go through that. We may also decide simply that we shouldn't feel those emotions. Those emotions are not acceptable or appropriate, and so we intellectualize them away. In my case, I struggle to feel anger about what happened in my childhood. To me, it doesn't feel safe to be angry. It doesn't feel appropriate to be angry at my parents, and so that's something that I'm not able to experience at this point. Maybe one day, but for now, that's something that I'm intellectualizing about rather than actually feeling it. It may also be that we can't talk about our feelings. We may just not have had enough practice understanding what's going on for us, understanding what feeling we're actually experiencing, having the vocabulary to do this. This is something my husband struggles with. He hasn't had a lot of practice talking about feelings, and so sometimes he just doesn't know what's going on for him. He can't express it as easily. It might help in that he can't go into his head because he doesn't have the words for it, but it also doesn't allow him necessarily to work through what it is he's experiencing. And it may also be simply that we feel emotionally disconnected. We may feel empty of emotions. We might feel numb. We're just not feeling or able to feel anything about what's going on for us. And that can be a sign that we are intellectualizing our emotions. And of course, as I mentioned, when we do intellectualize our emotions, we often lack empathy. So if we are lacking empathy for others' situations, that can be another important hint that we are stuck in our heads about what's going on for us. Once we realize that we are intellectualizing our emotions, what do we do about it? Well, the primary aim is to learn to feel, to start experiencing those emotions. But if we haven't done that for a long time, it can be pretty overwhelming. So it's important to understand the aim here is to learn to tolerate feelings in such a way that we can sit with them and feel them without them necessarily taking us over. So not feeling completely controlled by our emotions, not leaping into action because of the emotions we're having. And I've got a guide with some quick ways to regulate yourself as you are starting to have these emotions that you might find helpful. But it's really important that in order to feel these emotions that we feel safe. It's going to be very hard for us to start to want to let these emotions out if we're not in an environment or a situation that feels safe to do that. So that's an important prerequisite for starting to do this work. It's also important to recognize that we may be a hot mess when we start to do this work. It's not going to necessarily be neat and tidy, not all organized and packaged up like our mind wants it to be. Being emotional can be very messy. We may be expressing painful, ugly feelings, and we may be all over the place, and we need to be okay with the mess that we are while we go through this process. We also need to know that emotions are information. Emotions are data about what's going on for us. It's information about what's working for us and what isn't working for us. And so seeing information out of those emotions can be a really useful approach to not pushing them away. Okay, this is information about what I need to change or what isn't working for me or what my values are or where my boundaries are. We can use emotions as information. So in order to increase our ability to feel these emotions, we need to start with awareness. We need to start practicing noticing our feelings, noticing what's going on for us. And we can do this simply by just checking in regularly throughout the day, every so often, checking in and seeing what's going on for you, feeling, okay, right now I'm feeling mostly calm with a little bit of anxiety, and starting to label those emotions and figuring out just with practice what you feel on a day-to-day basis. And I've got a video about developing self-awareness that you might find helpful as you work to develop your awareness of what your emotions are throughout the course of the day. It can also be really useful to describe the experience. So instead of being in our head saying, I'm feeling angry, we can start to describe our experience, the characteristics of that emotion. So we might say, I feel like I've got a white, spiky ball in my throat. We're describing where it is, what shape it is, what color it is. It might feel silly to use those kinds of words, but what we're doing is we're tapping into the actual physical experience of those emotions. Or you might say, I feel like I've got a lead balloon in my stomach. Those kinds of ways of describing it get us out of our head and into our body and the experience of those emotions. We also need to notice the stories that we're telling ourselves. When we start to feel a feeling, we will start to feel things, and then our minds will start saying, well, this means that, or that's because of that. But those stories keep us stuck in our head. So we need to let go of those stories. We need to stop focusing on those stories and just feel the feelings. We also need to notice when the mind kicks in. What point in the process does the mind jump in and say, okay, it's time for me to take over? We might start to feel a feeling and we're starting to experience, but then something happens and our mind kicks in and we switch gears into intellectualizing what's going on for us. So we need to notice when that happened and maybe what that trigger was that caused us to decide it was no longer safe to keep feeling this, and we need to start thinking about it instead. We also need to ask ourselves when we are having these moments where the mind takes over, what is it that I'm trying to avoid here? What is it that I'm afraid of? What is it that I don't want to feel about these situations? And these questions can help us start to dig at the underlying motivations for our intellectualization of our emotions. We also need to practice self-care. So self-care can be things that help us relax. It can be things that enhance our mindfulness of what's going on for us. But these self-care activities that help us to slow down and be here and now help us connect with our emotions, help us actually notice what's going on, give us the space to experience those feelings. And so self-care can be a really important piece of this. And part of that is coming into the present moment, grounding ourselves in our bodies, in the current moment, in the present moment. And I've got a guide with a bunch of different grounding activities that you might want to download so that you can figure out ways to bring yourself into the here and now and be really present with what's going on for you. And we also need to come into our bodies. So coming into our bodies can also be called somatic experiencing. It's a fancy word for experiencing things through the body. Instead of doing it through the mind, we're actually experiencing things using our bodies. And that experiencing of our emotions through our bodies allows us to actually feel them and process them and work through what's happening for us. We also need to find healthier mechanisms that we can use in these situations. We need to find healthier ways to express our emotions that don't involve denying what's going on for us, but instead involve accepting and allowing what's going on for us to happen so that we can feel and experience and move through it. This might be things like humor, it might be service to others, it might also be some kind of outlet, a healthy outlet. So let's say we're feeling a lot of anger. If we take up a really physical sport, that can be a healthier way to allow those feelings to move through us without shutting them down and pushing them away. It can also help if we can talk to others to actually express what's going on for us, because it helps us get clearer on what's going on for us. It helps us practice using the words and tuning into what's going on for us. But this can also be really challenging if you are coming from a complex PTSD background, because often in those situations, being vulnerable doesn't feel safe. So it's very important that you only do this when you feel safe. And of course, you can work with a professional as well. They can help you develop skills and awareness to recognize the emotions that are going on for you and help you express them in safe and healthy ways. It's important to remember that intellectualization of your emotions is a strategy. It's not a flaw. It can actually be helpful sometimes. So the aim here is not to get rid of it entirely. We're not trying to never intellectualize. We're just trying to put it back into balance. You also need to realize that self-awareness is not the same as intellectualization. Self-awareness includes both experiencing what's going on for you and knowledge of what's going on for you. So you notice what's going on and you actually experience it. It's also important to not go into rumination. We are not spending all this time in our heads ruminating about our emotions now. We are trying to experience what's going on. We're not judging ourselves. We're not criticizing ourselves. We're not feeling blame or shame or guilt or any of those things. We are trying to come from a neutral place where we observe what's going on for us and experience it deeply and genuinely. What we're aiming for here is a healthy balance. We are trying to balance using our mind and experiencing what's going on for us so that everything works better. So now you understand what intellectualizing your emotions actually is, why we do it, the problems it can cause, and some things you can do to actually counter that tendency so that you can actually reconnect with yourself and feel fully alive. And to help you sit with those emotions as they start to arise so you don't feel overwhelmed, watch this video next. Got questions? Comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.